5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello again. This is Michael Lund, and we are at the concluding session of Home and Abroad, an online writing seminar for veterans, military, and family members. Today I'm going to take you into my scholarly world, the Victorian novel, and particularly the career of Charles Dickens, to think about how writing works and how audiences respond to writing. Since we've all seen or read some version of Dickens's The Christmas Carol, we know that in his novels, the author celebrated good times with family and friends. He himself loved to eat, and they say he made a wicked punch. So to talk about his career as a writer, it's fitting to start with a meal. And here at the conclusion of our Home and Abroad writing seminar, we'll have to consume our foods in virtual reality. But we've all brought something to the table and should be strengthened for the journey forward by what is before us today, what we have written. Some years back, my wife and I had dinner at the Beech Tree Inn in eastern North Carolina. It's unlikely you would know about this place, as they don't advertise except by word of mouth, and there's so much off the beaten paths of tourists that they're actually in the middle of a cotton field. While we're not technically locals in northeastern North Carolina, my wife and I inherited a summer home in this area and have been visiting there for years. Friends told us we'd like the beech tree, which we do very much. That Thursday night, a couple whose children had grown up with ours were visiting from Tucson. As the four of us came into the restaurant, we greeted the hostess and then stepped aside to let a party of 6, like some Dickens characters in a mood to have a good time. We let them go past into one of the inn's small dining rooms. But then a man from that group turned around and hugged my wife, rather enthusiastically, I noted. "Ann Lund," he said. She said, "Bucket Taylor." Those two had been graduate students together at Emory University in Atlanta more than 35 years earlier. They hadn't seen each other for 20 years and did not know where each was living. Bucket and his wife Lynn, who was there with him, and Ann and I had gone different ways after our years at Emory, though there we had lived across the street from each other. My wife went to Hampton-Sydney College in Virginia as a professor, Dr. Taylor to Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee, and then some years later to the University of Nevada, Reno. What were we all doing in an out-of-the-way restaurant in rural North Carolina on a Thursday night? There are 2 answers to that question. Let me say, however, before I leave the Beech Tree Inn, that we had the crab cakes and they were delicious. A first way to explain the unlikely circumstance of 2 couples from distant and unrelated places unexpectedly meeting at a spot where few people congregate goes this way. Each of us is a free agent, a person with desires and goals, and we determine the course of our life wherever we meet. In such a scenario, it's sheer coincidence that the 4 of us came together that night, and it defies any rational measurement of the odds. That's one explanation, but we can think of this in another way. There is a context that channels people along certain paths, and these 4 individuals may have been drawn to a single location at one moment by larger forces we don't always recognize. Consider these factors. Bucket and Ann each grew up in Virginia and might well want to end their careers close to home. Both remember fondly summer vacations near the water, he on the Chesapeake Bay, she on the ocean at Nags Head and Virginia Beach. And finally, they're both biologists who love marshes, marine life, interesting ecosystems. Mike and Ann, Bucket and Lynn could be dining at the same place at the same time because the larger environment within which they pursue their dreams favors their movement to that location. We can see literary history in these 2 frameworks as well. A great work, like Charles Dickens' Pickwick Papers, is either produced by the genius of the author, who creates memorable characters and presents them in powerful ways, or that novel is being called into being by circumstances that are favorable to the appearance of those very characters, depicted as they are in particular places at a specific moment in time. Let's think further then about the case of Charles Dickens, the author, and his Victorian audience, as well as about ourselves as writers and the people we hope to reach with our words. A struggling newspaper reporter covering the Houses of Parliament in London in 1835, Dickens is a man who hopes for fame and fortune. He wants to marry, but his job barely provides for him alone. The only other writing for money he's been able to produce are short character sketches he sells to magazines on the side, using a pen name, Boz, B-O-Z. The collected sketches of Boz receives only modest acclaim. He is offered a chance to earn a little bit more money by two young entrepreneurial publishers, Edward Chapman and William Hall. They have contracted a well-known artist, Robert Seymour, to do a series of sketches about English sporting life. Their plan is to have Seymour do 4 drawings each month, and they hire Dickens to provide a limited amount of commentary on the scenes depicted by Seymour. The group of retired gentlemen who travel the countryside for pleasure is called the Pickwick Club. The first 4 issues of this Chapman and Hall enterprise are successful. Enough copies of these little pamphlets, about 400 each, earn enough to pay Seymour, Dickens, and themselves. But it's not a breakthrough until number 5, when sadly Robert Seymour takes his own life after completing only 2 monthly issues. Dickens convinces Chapman and Hall to let him embellish the storyline that accompanies the illustration. This expanding story attracts particular attention when he introduces the character of Sam Weller, broadens the range of stories told each month, and finds his own distinctive blend of realistic detail and fantastically eccentric characters. I will close my remarks, by the way, with a sample of Dickens' inimitable style. An influential review in the June 12, 1836 Sunday Times spreads words of this increasingly popular venture. Before long, Chapman and Hall are selling not 400 copies a month, but 40,000, a figure of success unmatched by any other writer of his time. And in general, this number of sales is consistent until the end of his life in 1870. So, in this view, Dickens the genius bursts into the world literary stage and into literary history. I let this famous illustration of his character, Mr. Pickwick, skating on ice, stand for the author's preeminent position in the Victorian novel. To be thorough, however, in our consideration of why Dickens' Pickwick Papers was so successful and are now very valuable, we must also consider the context that contributed to Dickens' phenomenal success. The first genuine mass market phenomenon in literary history. Let's start with production, that is, the steam engine. Invented by James Watt in 1765, it is refined, distributed, harnessed to do work in all facets of British life by the 1830s. It drives printing presses at many times the speed and much less cost than the older manual machines. Chapman and Hall can produce pamphlets, magazines, books in numbers unimaginable a generation earlier. The steam engine can also be used to produce paper, processing rags and other raw material into the rolls that unwind with dizzying speed and are mechanically cut and bound into the parts of novels. Then there is distribution. Put that steam engine on wheels and tracks, and you have railroads reaching to almost every corner of England, carrying these books produced so rapidly and so cheaply. Then put that steam engine on a boat. Let it power you across the Atlantic and the Pacific, and you're putting Pickwick into the hands of readers around the globe. readers with money. They're also produced in staggeringly new numbers by the Industrial Revolution. The manufacturers, clerks, railroad managers, commercial record keepers, government officials overseeing these vast operations, legislators writing bills, and members of the press chronicling it all around the globe, they have money to buy books and the leisure time to read them. They must be literate for their work, and rapidly spreading literacy generates subscribers to the Pickwick papers, especially when Chapman and Hall take payment, as they do, in installments. One doesn't need the pound or more to purchase a single book, but only a shilling. There are 20 shillings to the pound. And this newly empowered middle class, who are not sons of the aristocrats who have ruled England for centuries, they want to learn about the past and about the fast-changing present, so they can wield a power new to them. They get the vote in 1832. Finally, the older characters Dickens offered his readers and the leisurely pace of their rambling adventures appealed to a generation facing rapid change in ways no previous era had. People who had been organized by class, lived from childhood to old age in one place, and repeated the ancient agricultural patterns passed down for generations, found themselves overnight in an urban, industrialized, largely middle-class world. Pickwick's antics, remarkably animated to be sure by Dickens' exuberant prose, calmed and reassured harried Victorian readers. So great are the forces then creating a market for entertaining and educational reading material in 1836 that one might argue Dickens's novel was sucked into being through a number of hoses connected to one giant steam engine. Foop! It's Pickwick. My image for this scenario of a work generated by audience demand can also be illustrated in the novel when Mr. Pickwick falls through the ice he was skating on. The sport was at its height, the sliding was at the quickest, writes Dickens. The laughter was at the loudest when a sharp, smart crack was heard. There was a quick rush towards the bank, a wild scream from the ladies, and a shout from Mr. Tupman. A large mass of ice disappeared, the water burbled up. Over it, Mr. Pickwick's hat, gloves, and handkerchief were floating on the surface, and this was all of Mr. Pickwick that anybody could see. He is, of course, rescued. So, just like Dickens and his readers in an earlier era, it's possible that our stories that we're writing in home and abroad, and an audience of American citizens are going to come together at this moment because the times are right for more communication between the civilian and the military sectors of our population. A combination of forces, your personal experience, current events at a national level, the world's ever-changing dynamics, created characters that created channels that guided you to home and abroad. Now we will look for venues in which our words can travel outward toward readers. Therefore, we can agree with Dickens that celebrations, especially with friends and family, are a fine thing. And since we have mental refreshments today, what we've written collaboratively and individually, I propose we continue enjoying each other's company via the reading of the works produced in this seminar. But first, a blessing of sorts, in the words of another unforgettable Dickens character, the Reverend Mr. Chadband, a frightfully hypocritical, irritatingly long-winded, spectacularly pompous preacher in his novel Bleak House. He says, "My friends," says Mr. Chadband to a gathering at the home of Mr. Snagsby, a lost stationery, "my friends, peace be on this house, on the master thereof, on the mistress thereof, on the young maidens, and on the young men. My friends, why do I wish for peace? What is peace? Is it war? No. Is it strife? No. Is it lovely and gentle and beautiful and pleasant and serene and joyful? Oh, yes. Therefore, my friends, I wish for peace upon you and upon yours. My friends," Chadband goes on, what is this which we now behold as being spread before us? refreshment. Do we need refreshment then, my friends? We do. And why do we need refreshment, my friends? Because we are but mortal, because we are but sinful, because we are but of the earth, because we are not of the air. Can we fly, my friends? We cannot. Why can we not fly, my friends? One of Chad Band's audience ventures to observe in a cheerful and rather knowing tone, "No wings," but is immediately frowned down. Chad Band goes on. "I say, my friends," pursues Mr. Chad Band, utterly rejecting and obliterating this unwelcome suggestion, "why can we not fly? Is it because we are calculated to walk? It is. Could we walk, my friends, without strength? We could not. What should we do without strength, my friends? Our legs would refuse to bear us. Our knees would buckle up. Our ankles would turn over, and we should come to the ground. Then from whence, my friends, in a human point of view, do we derive the strength that is necessary for our limbs? Is it," he glances over at the table, "from bread in various forms, from butter which is churned from the milk which is yielded unto us by the cow, from the eggs which are laid by the fowl, from ham, from tongue, from sausage, and from such like? It is. Then let us partake of the good things which are set before us." Oh, what is happiness? Oh dear. I've got people I grew up with that I've known for over 60 years. And I know who they are, and I value them, and they make me happy.